come unite and organize. Power, there is power in a union. Power, there is power in our hands. Power, we stand and fight together. There is power in a union on many lands. Power, come and reach across the borders. Power, come and open up your eyes. Power, we stand and fight together. There's power when we organize. Power, we stand and fight together. There is power when we organize. Power, when we stand and fight together. There is power when we organize.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. Black Women's Equal Pay Day is Monday, July 31st, the day that marks how long into the year black women have to work to be paid the same wages as a white man was paid last year. The Economic Policy Institute says black women workers are paid just 67 cents on the dollar compared to white non-Hispanic men. And that is even after controlling for other factors like education, years of experience, and location. Black women workers in the U.S. are the victims of both gender and race pay gaps. EPI says over the last 37 years, gender wage gaps have narrowed, but racial wage gaps are worse. White women's wages are 76% of white men's, but black women are at 67% of white men's wages. And EPI says myths, like if black women worked harder, they'd get the pay they deserve, are false. Black women work longer hours than white women. Economists at EPI say a second myth is that black women can educate themselves out of the pay gap. EPI says black women are paid less than white men at every level of education. A third myth is that black women choose lower-paying occupations. The reality there is that in all occupations, black women make less than white men. WIN's Joanne Powers has more labor news.
The United Steelworkers reached a tentative agreement with Goodyear Tire and Rubber late Saturday night, averting a possible strike just hours shy of the deadline. If approved, the 5-year master contract would cover 7,000 workers at 5 plants in Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Kansas. Workers voted in April to authorize a strike if an agreement couldn't be reached before the previous 4-year contract expired at midnight Saturday. Although both sides have been largely silent about negotiations, the Steelworkers Policy Committee indicated in a message to members on Thursday that the company and the union were still far apart on issues including wages, health care, scheduling, and pensions. They also alleged that Goodyear had threatened probationary new hires with firing if they took part in a potential strike. The agreement must now be ratified by USW members at the individual plants. Votes are expected in the next few weeks. The union representing 16,500 workers at Walmart's main supermarket chain in Chile announced Friday that workers have voted to go on strike, calling for higher wages. Walmart operates nearly 400 stores in the country. Either party can now request government-mediated talks in an attempt to reach a settlement and avert the strike.
Brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield National Labor Office, empowering working Americans with stable health coverage for over 50 years. The National Labor Office is committed to remaining the top choice for the 17 million union workers, retirees, and families they serve. Online at bcbs.com/NLO.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
It's my
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, tons and tons going on. Wow. And look, what a week last week was. Honestly and truthfully, what a week. And you know, as I was thinking about this earlier today, it was like, I don't know, to be honest, as far as weeks go, now in the Trumpian new world, it was pretty much an uneventful week. An uneventful week where he fully endorsed police brutality. When you put them in the car, just knock their head off the roof and knock them around a little bit, right? Where he woke up one morning and decided, we're going to ban people from the military, gave what can only be described as a head-scratching, politicized speech to 30,000 Boy Scouts, threatened Alaska. His chief of staff resigns after being whatever that was from the mooch. And I'm still struggling calling a grown man the mooch, or why you would want to be called a mooch. Now, when I was a kid, mooch was not a good frame. Maybe things have changed. And not to mention the failed ACA repeal. I guess, all a normal week in the White House, right? A normal week. Now, here's the thing. The Republicans, they're trying to move on. They're trying to move towards getting something that maybe they can get done that their base really wants. Or not their base. Well, yeah, their moneyed base really wants, and that's tax reform. But their fearless leader still obsessing with Obamacare tweets where day before yesterday he tweeted out, unless Republican senators are total quitters, repeal and replace is not dead. Demand another vote before any other bill. Now, here's the great thing, and I found this out over the weekend. And, now giving me a whole nother frame on the John McCain vote. Because I had questioned, why bother coming all the way back from Arizona if you're only going to be the deciding vote that's going to kill it. I found out this week on a budget reconciliation, you can only, and I'm still digging deeper in this, but several sources have told me that you can only vote on a budget reconciliation on one issue once a year. Now, understand, they can change this. They can move it in a different direction and do some other things. But for this particular piece of legislation, I guess they can only do it once. So this was a great kind of in-your-face move, because if you watch the video, it's great. It's like the Gipper coming out the last time, or one of those great moments in sports where Kirk Gibson comes out gimping to hit a home run. He comes out, he does the thumbs down right in front of a Mitch McConnell who very, very sternly looking with arms folded. I'm sure everyone's seen the video. But you've got Trump who can't let it go. And you go, you obsess much? And he tweeted out again, don't give up, Republican senators. The world is watching. Repeal and replace. And go to 51 votes, nuke option, get cross state lines and more. Again, you knew this was coming. You knew that they were going to push for the nuclear option. He continues to go on, if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt insurance companies? And why should Congress not be paying what public pays? And again, that really hits to that populist kind of frame. Because, look, I don't want to bail insurance companies out either. In fact, I don't even want them around. And this is where I'm hoping people will clamp onto this and go, you're right. Why do we need these insurance companies? I was giving the lecture to the kids last night after dinner, which, my wife loves to tell me that I used to like to lecture. She used to call me the professor years and years ago. Because, I get on these rants about things, and the kids were just feeding me. And, I'm going through, doesn't it make sense that you would have only one insurance pool that everybody was in, and that you wouldn't have all of these kind of special interest Band-Aids all over the place? And even, my 9 and 11-year-olds go, yeah, that makes sense. Why don't we do it that way? Because it makes sense. That's why we don't do it. And because there are tons of special interests who have their hands in the till, their snouts in the trough, and they don't want to let go. And do you blame them? Not really. But for the rest of us, if we don't get our hand in the till, it doesn't work. And which is why fortunately, the Affordable Care Act is still the law of the land. Understand Republicans are going to do everything they can do to destroy it by starving it. We know that. This is where, people pressure really important. And look, McCain deserves credit. Moreover, I think Murkowski deserves the most credit because she was the one who was actually threatened by this White House. Susan Collins, also a lot of credit. But moreover, it was people. The fact that all of us, the resistance, people called, emailed, wrote, marched, knocked on doors, screamed, hollered, yelled in the streets. The ADAPT people who wheeled themselves to Washington, D.C., slept outside, were arrested, handcuffed, just treated horribly. So much more than just John McCain. So now what we understand is the move by the Republicans is, look, we've been a failure so far. Everything they have attempted, fortunately, has gone down in flames because it's bad stuff. Where's the populism? We're making people's lives better? Understand, the Affordable Care Act actually made people's lives better. May not have been great, and I agree, but it made people's lives better. Everything the Republicans have done thus far has not been about making people's lives better. It's been about taking back. It's been about constricting. It's been about destroying and tearing apart and tearing down and dividing. And also, the kleptocracy, it's about the very wealthy being able to profit. It's about, we're going to get rid of those regulations so the well-to-do can do well-to-do. And what we're going to hear, and understand, we know this is next. The big tax deform plan is going to be unveiled, and we know this is going to be just devastating to working families across this country. And today, at the Newseum, and yes, there is a Newseum, our Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, White House Legislative Affairs Director Mark Short, they're going to be appearing at the Koch network-sponsored event there at the Newseum. Because the Koch brothers, they know what they want. They want massive tax breaks. Massive tax breaks. And what we know beyond adventure, what we know as an absolute fact, anytime we give tax breaks to the very wealthy, it comes at the expense of, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education, infrastructure investment, the future. And, by the way, us. Because understand, and get ready for it, the rich are going to get richer, and you and I, we're going to pay the bill. We know that beyond adventure. We know that to be the fact. In fact, we have created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. And when we hear people say, Rick, we're broke. Can't afford, education. We can't afford infrastructure. We can't afford any of this stuff. We are at the richest point in our country's history. We are at the richest point in civilized history. We have more billionaires than the Forbes 400 will allow. In fact, we as a nation have created 153 extra billionaires. There used to be 400. 400, that was the heavy 400. Now it's got to go 153 more because we've done such a great job of creating billionaires. And why? Well, at the expense of working people. It is just infuriating to me, and I got a bunch of emails last week of people going, it doesn't make any sense that Amazon founder and head guy Bezos is worth $90 billion while paying people $11-12 an hour to actually create the wealth that he enjoys. And look, I don't want to deny anybody anything, but at the end of the day, it's called theft. Because behind every great billionaire, in my view, a great crime. And that great crime was, Amazon didn't pay sales tax for a really long time. They don't have the brick and mortar costs, and they're a monopoly now. At some point, we've got to, as a country, stop monopoly. It just is what it is. Now, over with the tax debate, tons of stuff we've got to be paying attention to. What's going to be the top corporate tax rate? How will they gut that? Repatriation, are they bringing back all that money at a very small rate? Basically another handout to the wealthy? What's the individual tax rate going to look like? Are we going to see a drop from the 39.6? Are we going to see that down 30, 29, 25? And at what cost to the rest of us? Will we see an end to the alternative minimum tax? Is that coming? Because understand, Donald Trump paid, in what we know of his tax returns, Donald Trump paid the amount he paid because of the alternative minimum tax, something he said he doesn't like already. And what about pass-through businesses? What about these small pass-through businesses that big corporations set up to funnel money away? We going to see anything done with that? We going to see anything done with the border adjustment tax that he said he wanted? Anything? Lots to pay attention to. Estate tax, lots to pay attention to as this tax reform goes forward. Because understand, the heavy six, the big six, the Paul Ryans, the Kevin Bradys, the Mitch McConnells, they want massive tax breaks. Not to mention Orrin Hatch and Mnuchin. Mnuchin. Lots and lots to talk about. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Propane Jane going to be here. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Disorder in the house. There's a flaw in the system. And the fly in the ointment's gonna bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that the NFL Players Association went out on strike. The American Football League and the National Football League officially merged that year. Each league had their own Players Association. With the league merger, they joined forces into one union. The players elected John Mackey, a tight end with the Baltimore Colts, their first president. Frustrated by pay and lack of control over their careers, the players voted to strike. The strike lasted for 2 days. The owners threatened to cancel the season. The NFL used its powerful PR machine to vilify the players in the press. They characterized the players as greedy and stoked fan anger over the walkout. The two sides met again at the bargaining table and reached a collective bargaining agreement. The agreement covered 4 years. The players won improvements to their pensions and dental care. They also secured the right to have agent representation for the first time. But many of the disagreements over pay and control remained unsettled. In 1974, the players were back out on the picket line for 5 weeks during the summer. 8 years later, a 57-day strike disrupted the season. 7 weeks of games were canceled. Then again, 5 years later, the union went on strike during the season. This time, some of the players crossed the picket lines, including stars like Joe Montana and Lawrence Taylor. This broke the strike without settling on a contract. Today, the NFL Players Association continues to push for improved player safety and revenue sharing. The impact of concussions on players' long-term health remains an important issue for the union. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
So last night, Reuters reported that, and it's one of those things just mind-blowing to me. They reported that the U.S. vows, quote, strong and swift actions against the architects of authoritarianism in response to what it called a flawed election in Venezuela. The press release by the State Department reads, the U.S. stands behind the people of Venezuela and their constitutional representatives in their quest to restore their country to a full and prosperous democracy. We will continue to take strong and swift action against the architects of authoritarianism in Venezuela, including those who participated in the National Constituent Assembly as a result of today's flawed election. The State Department condemned violence by Venezuelan authorities against protesters and urged governments in the region and around the world to, quote, hold accountable those who undermine democracy, deny human rights, bear responsibility for violence and repression, or engage in corrupt practices. Do I really have to say it? Do I really need to bring that home? Yeah, maybe not. Anyway, here to talk about this, that, and the other, I've asked our good friend Propane Jane to come back with us. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So, I mean, I look at that and I go, really? Do I have to say anything? Can that just be left right there?
I'm suffocating under the projection and hypocrisy and, man, the irony.
I mean, the violence part, was something that's really kind of stuck in my throat, especially after last week, the president basically full-throated endorsement of police brutality.
Exactly. He's done everything that they laid out there. I mean, it's almost like they are making sort of a resistance pamphlet for the opposition to the Trump administration.
Just absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But I look at this, and again, it's this, we're clean as the fresh-driven snow, and everybody else is horrible. And, you look at all of this stuff, and I'm struggling. Because here, we still have a president who just this weekend tweeted out again something about the election, and I'm going, dude, the election's over. Get over, move on. Help us.
He can't move on, and he cannot stop the disaster. I mean, I tweeted something the other day, a couple of months ago, this is like back in June, Donald Trump said he was giving Reince Priebus until July 4th to clean up the mess in the White House.
Gonna drain the swamp.
He wanted him to drain the swamp, and it was so preposterous then because ultimately, Trump is the swamp. Trump himself is the swamp, and everything that trickles down from him is dysfunctional because he is dysfunctional. And this is why we call him instability in chief. And the instability that is internal for him has become projected onto the world now. Because, his entire administration is unstable. I mean, every single day they're shaking it up at the White House and they're hitting the reset button. I mean, how many times can you hit the reset button before you take, your fine-tuned machine back to the shop and say, hey, I'm having to hit the reset button too many times. And I think that, him kind of ratcheting up these authoritarian plays in terms of inciting violence, this fascist, he's basically soliciting Gestapo, his own SS, and trying to use the police force to carry out, his fantasies of dictatorship. I think that he doth protest too much, and his entire State Department does as well.
Yeah, but you look at this and you go, isn't that what the mooch was brought in? I got to push back on the mooch nickname. When I was a kid, being called a mooch was not a good thing. Or is it just that I'm getting old?
But I mean, again, you can't make any of this stuff up. I mean, the way that it is playing out, I mean, art cannot imitate what's happening in real life. And I think that Scaramucci is just a testament to, I don't know if you ever saw Key and Peele and how they had Luther, acting as President Obama's anger translator. Yeah. And Scaramucci, in a lot of ways, is Trump's id. Now that he has hit crisis mode, he has reverted to his most primitive self, and in doing so, he has brought on Scaramucci, who basically says everything that he wants to say. He is translating all of that anger that Trump feels internally, and just doesn't care. He doesn't care that people don't like the vulgarity. He doesn't care that, it's incompetent for him to sort of be saying these things and not realizing that it's on the record. or even thinking that you can behave in this way and somehow it's supposed to be kept under wraps for the sake of Donald Trump and his administration. And again, this is just another example of the sociopathy that's going on and the instability that is there as a result of the sociopathy and the narcissism.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, you got the little mooch and big mooch. So now we've got President Mooch. I mean, because it's kind of like a mini-me scenario, if you will. It is what you're saying, and you're right. I mean, I think the reason that he likes the Mooch guy is that he is vulgar and that he is he's gonna bring the straight talk. And here's the problem. I look at the dysfunction in this White House, and fortunately, from my perspective, nothing is going to get done because they are so dysfunctional. Right. But as a country, I mean, the rest of the world is looking at us and going, how crazy are they? And they're moving on. And I'll give you an example. This weekend you had North Korea, with another test. And you have, Nikki Haley tweeting out, quote, "Done talking about North Korea. China is aware they must act. Japan and South Korea must increase pressure. Not only is the U.S. A U.S. problem, it will require an international solution." And Trump tweeted some stuff out as well. And it looks to me like, all of the bullying, the bombastic tough talk and the finger wagging has turned into, well, we're just going to throw up our hands and blame everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, this is the best they can do. This is the best that Trump has ever been able to do in his entire 71 years on this earth, is when things fall apart, everyone else gets the blame but him. And the most loyal supporters, his most loyal surrogates, are going and propagating that message. If something wrong has happened, it has happened because these other people didn't do something. I think the Obamacare, everything that's happened over the past week with the Obamacare repeal in the Senate is also a great example of that, is that Trump didn't put any skin in the game. And so when it fails, he's able to just go, that's on them, and they're going to pay the consequences. And it's their fault that it didn't get over the finish line. And I think that, again, Nikki Haley, obviously she's, doing the best that she can. And certainly there are people, John Kelly now is next in line, to try to herd all of the cats. But again, this is a very difficult job for anyone who signs on to be in his administration, because not only are they taking their eyes off of the balls, that are actually where we need to be focusing, where the actual threats are in terms of North Korea, in terms of Russia. They don't want to have any hand in that because it might, implicate Trump in some kind of way in terms of how he's dealing with those two problems. And so they're going to focus on Venezuela. They're going to focus on all of these other things. He's going to continue to have these emotional battles with, Jeff Sessions and the press to, again, just deflect and obfuscate away from his failures.
Yeah, I mean, but the one thing that popped out in my mind is, you've got a guy who's a bully, actually being bullied by a much smaller bully and not really knowing how to deal with it. I mean, and what the rest of the world is seeing is now we've got a loud dog with no teeth.
And again, Trump aspires to be a member of the dictator club, and he is a bully. And so when he is put in the ring with other bullies, then that's when that submissive role comes out again. It's like we talked about his relationship with Putin. And though, sort of economically and in terms of like global stature, Russia is very small, like you're saying, Putin, that particular authoritarian, holds something over Trump. He has something over him, and therefore Trump becomes submissive when he's dealing with him. And so I do think you have to worry about, what he's doing in regards to his foreign policy with these people who actually are ratcheting up these threats. Because in a lot of ways he's lost a lot of the good faith and respect, I think, even from the military. I mean, everything that he's done with this transgender ban over the last week, And the way that the military has pushed back and said, hey, until we actually get some concrete policy, we're not really obeying the commander-in-chief. I mean, they're basically saying, without saying, this is instability in chief, and we can't go along with it. And so I do think in terms of North Korea, when he actually is being, advised by his military leaders, they are not able to see eye to eye because Trump is so irrational,
right.
And he doesn't understand what is even going on in terms of foreign policy. And the way that they even give him briefings is so tenuous, because they actually know. They've said we can't even get him to read the briefings unless his name is strategically placed every couple of sentences, so he'll keep paying attention to it. And so I think that his inability even to execute a foreign policy is still hampered, and that's why he can't come up with a strong response to these bad actors.
Geez, what does that say? I mean, and again, what is that telling the rest of the world when look, I mean, it sounds like a joke. It sounds comical that we've got a president who can't read anything unless on a certain level he's being, honored or he's being, spoken well of. What does it say to the rest of the world?
It says that we can be manipulated. It says that as a country, as a superpower, we are weakened right now, and that we are being divided and conquered. And I do think that it makes people, who want to do us harm, it incites them. This is a time where they feel that we're vulnerable, and so they are going to act out. They are going to do things. I mean, classic example is when, in grade school, when the teacher is out and you get a substitute teacher, the baddest actors in the class see that as an opportunity to, hey, I'm going to really, act up today. Because this is a substitute, and this is somebody who doesn't know the rules and doesn't know how things are conducted in this classroom, and I can take advantage of them. And I do think that without Obama's leadership, now all of a sudden you see these people kind of escalating in their behaviors, and it's because they recognize that the emperor has no clothes and that nobody's minding the store.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard this, and I thought I would never hear it. And I had hoped I would never hear it, and I know you know where I'm going. Being from Texas, you've got W down there. There are a lot of people going, boy, he seems a lot smarter now.
I know. I'm embarrassed to say it. But it's true. It really is true. And I can even add on Dick Cheney, and I hope I don't get struck by lightning for saying that. Because at the end of the day, you at least had some confidence that they weren't going to sell us out to Russia or sell us out to our kind of worst enemies, and that there would be some level of competency just in terms of trying to maintain safety.
Yeah, I think
certainly, and I'm saying this about people who, 9/11 happened on their watch. I mean, I don't want to say that somehow they were doing a better job, but at the same time, they actually were. I mean, that's just how bad Trump is right now.
That's speaking volumes.
Yeah.
I believe that of W. I'm sure in his way he tried.
Yeah.
And compared to Trump, seems like a political expert. Now, Dick Cheney, I have no nice words to say about Dr. Evil.
No, I don't either.
I think he would be willing to sell us out to whomever. But that's just my thought. But here again, you look at this, and yet we still have people who support this administration. Now, the numbers are dwindling.
Yes.
I've seen a bunch of Republican, publications, like the National Review had the death of the effing salesman. That was the headline of their thing. You've had some Republican operatives coming out and saying
right.
a lot of dysfunction. In fact, I now have a little respect for Reince Priebus.
Right? I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I think Sean Spicer kind of foreshadowed a lot of this when he resigned explicitly because of Scaramucci coming into the White House. And at that point, they really, some of this information started to come out about the conflicts between Scaramucci and Reince Priebus. And I think it is symbolic of this schism that is happening with Donald Trump, the outsider, and the establishment Republican Party, and their inability to try to, mold him into someone who can lead their party. This was an experiment for the Republican Party as well. And I do think that, again, legislatively, everything that's happened or not happened, actually, over the last 6 months, is again another illustration of how that experiment is not even working out well for the Republican Party. And in addition to that, the way that he's been going after Jeff Sessions, I think, and the response that you're seeing from a lot of the, high-profile establishment Republicans in the Senate in particular, who are now pushing back and defending Jeff Sessions. And part of it, yes, is, because he's their buddy, and of course they're saying, they want some separation between the DOJ and the White House, et cetera, and he shouldn't be, threatened out of doing his job. But a lot of this also has to do with the fact that Trump has now broken the 11th commandment. He is now speaking very poorly of establishment Republicans who are there actually furthering the Republican platform.
Yep.
And so he is now endangering their electoral prospects, because if that base turns against those establishment Republicans who hold seats in Congress, and he actually whips them up into a frenzy to primary all of these people out, or to fire Jeff Sessions, or to do any of this stuff that hurts the Republicans, then now they are in a bad position. And I think that they are souring on Trump for that reason in particular, despite the fact that they, obviously had multiple opportunities to sour on him up until this point. But this is like, he's gone too far, basically.
Well, again, it's going to come back to his popularity ratings very poor.
Mm-hmm.
If the stink gets on them, they'll turn on him. And look, when you had Lindsey Graham coming out, if he fires Jeffy, there'll be hell to pay.
Yeah, he said, "Holy hell!"
Exactly.
He's and of course Lindsey Graham likes to talk tough, but at the same time, I don't doubt what he's saying. I don't doubt that these, in particular, Southern Republicans, who, again, are very much responsible for Trump being in the White House. Their intensity, their fervor, their, enthusiasm is what put Trump there.
Yep.
And if they start feeling ungrateful, and we're already seeing polls where he's losing people in Texas, Arizona, across the South, Georgia, his support is really slipping in the South. And I think that can directly be tied to what he's doing in regards to Jeff Sessions and the way that he's starting these fights with the establishment party. And once he loses them, he's in very, very, very shaky territory.
Yeah, I mean, for a guy who preaches loyalty, to be this openly disloyal to someone who was one of his really early supporters and someone who really carried the water for him and is actually doing policy-wise exactly what Trump wants and what he said he was going to do. Look, Jeffy said during the confirmation process he was going to recuse himself.
Yes, he did.
How do you have a president now who's like surprised that, I can't believe he did that?
He's shooting his own self in the foot. If he would just be quiet, and Jeff Sessions is looking at him and going, "Hey, dude, I'm trying to help you. Yes, I recused myself. Yes, I even perjured myself, but I'm still in this job, and I'm still doing everything we said we were going to do." And that's again why Jeff Sessions is playing it pretty cool and just saying, "Hey, I'm still going to be here. Yes, it's hurtful, but I'm just trying to work for Donald Trump because hey, he's getting the job done."
Yeah, I need a job. And you hit a point there that's kind of gotten lost lately. He perjured himself.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. But again, he's trying to keep the ship together. And I think that again, this is just another example of the self-sabotage that happens with these very malignantly, narcissistic people, is that they don't recognize, they are more incensed by what they perceive as a slight than they are able to look and go, yes, this person has been loyal to me, and yes, this person is actually trying to help me and trying to protect me. But, his ego goes above all of that, and he will destroy people and by, by extension, destroy himself because of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary stuff. But, as I started the show off, earlier saying, look, last week was kind of an uneventful week.
Yeah.
As far as Trumpian weeks in the White House has gone, fairly uneventful. Endorsed police brutality, wanting to ban a bunch of people from the military, that speech in front of the Boy Scouts, threatening Alaska. You got turmoil in the cabinet with the chief of staff going, the failed ACA. Just a normal week.
It's a normal week of instability in chief. If our standard is instability and he's unstable, then he's consistent. He's consistent with, what we've known him to be since he's been there.
Yeah. Let me ask you a last question. I mean, because, I look at this and, is there going to be a silent week where there isn't all of this turmoil and has there been a quiet week? And more importantly, can we as a public, can we as a nation, can we take this kind of every week having, just a laundry list full of insanity? Can we take this for another 3.5 years?
I don't think we can. I mean, I think we can't afford to. Certainly, it looks like, nothing is really, being done in the sense of just stopping the train on the tracks, as we continue to say. But, again, in terms of the parallels to what happens at the micro level when people are having mental health crises in their family, or even any kind of, crisis in their family, it goes on until everybody reaches a breaking point. And sometimes that breaking point is because, the disaster spirals so far out of control that, the person hurts themselves or hurts other people. But the level of, I think, consistency of instability is what is, I think, going to build people finally just getting up and getting fed up, including members of the Republican Party. And then, like we've been saying all of these months, that they are going to have to be the ones to initiate the steps of removing him from office. And maybe that tipping point will be the Mueller investigation. Maybe that will be the smoking gun or the proof that everyone needs that, hey, okay, this is really out of control, even though they'll be talking about information that happened in the past.
Right.
But maybe just that confirmation of, okay, yes, this really is a bad situation, and we need to take steps to get out of it. But I do think that it's the persistence of the instability that is going to get us to that point. I just hope that it happens before the consequences are very bad.
Because understand, there hasn't been a real crisis yet. This administration has not been tested really on any level, and that's the scary part in all of this. So maybe the next week we'll talk about a mass intervention, how we have an intervention and pull the president into, hey,
get him on the couch.
There you go.
Yeah.
Jane, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you.
You too. Have a great week.
Our good friend Propane Jane. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Station decision.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in News. On this day in labor history, the year was 1981. That was the day the long Major League Baseball strike finally came to an end. The issue that motivated the strike was a dispute between players and management over free agency. Day after summer day slipped by on the calendar with no end in sight. As a result of the strike, a total of 713 games were canceled in the middle of the regular season. And on this day, players and owners reached a compromise, which ended the lengthy strike. In the settlement, a team that lost a free agent could be compensated by drawing from a pool of players. Players agreed to restrict free agency to those who had 6 or more years in the major leagues. Because of the long strike, the All-Star game was pushed all the way back until August 9th. When you go to the ballpark, you're likely not thinking about labor issues. Nonetheless, the players are unionized and had to fight hard to win free agency and other protections. There have been 8 work stoppages in Major League Baseball. 1981 held the record as the longest, until 1994, that is. The strike started in August and resulted in the cancellation of the whole postseason. It was the first time a major sport had its postseason wiped out by a work stoppage. The strike was not settled until the following April. But the good news today is there are only balls and strikes on the field. So, play ball. Brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Poor Chris Christie. Mr. 81% disapproval rating. Evidently had another bad day over the weekend, was in Milwaukee for the Cubs and the Brewers, and evidently got into an altercation, a verbal jousting with a Cubs fan who, it looked pretty ominous. He had his nachos, was all up in this guy's face for just saying, something like, well, you suck. Look, not a good week for Christie at all, because it wasn't too long ago, I guess a couple of days ago, he was at a Mets game and caught a foul ball and was booed when he gave it to a kid a couple of rows behind him. Can't even win when doing something nice, and nor should he. Anyway, let's find out what's going on in the world and in Washington, D.C. Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Victoria, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, guess what?
What?
Because this is not something you would necessarily know. The Drudge Report has the headline, Trump in a slump.
That's still not as good as the National Review's. The death of an effing salesman.
Well, yes, but the National Review has been a bit of an anti-Trumpy for a while. Matt Drudge has been hanging out at the White House.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that does say something. Next, it'll be Breitbart.
Say it ain't so.
It'll be Steve.
Well, that could happen because most of the Breitbart alumni are working at the White House now.
I know.
Who's left?
Yeah, Steve Bannon will be typing after Mooch goes after him. Is it me, or would you want to be called a Mooch?
No, I wouldn't want to be called a Mooch.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to be called a Mini-Me either, because he's called Mini-Me as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd want any of that. I think he's got himself.
But he said it's all, hey, they're going after me because of my Italian name.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, Moochie.
Yeah, again, nicknames generally have a reason.
They do.
There you go. I'm going to leave it right there. Hey, over the weekend, I actually had a little bit of respect for Reince Priebus.
First it's Sean Spicer, and then it's Reince Priebus. Pretty soon you're going to have respect for Alex Jones. I mean, there are... Well, maybe not.
No, you've gone too far there.
No, but it's true, because basically Sean Spicer was a guy from the RNC who did communication, did PR. Okay, it's a job. Reince Priebus was the chairman of the RNC. It's a job. These are mainstream Republicans. These are guys with political philosophies
and actual credentials in actually understanding the job. Yeah, I know I know you're going.
And whatever your belief system, there's you may disagree with me on this, but there's basically nothing wrong with being a Republican if you believe it.
Right. No, look, I actually have respect for honest, true conservatives who stick to their core principles and can articulate what they are. The problem is conservative principles today have been so bastardized that you got to go. What do you actually believe in?
And it's difficult. I think if you're trying to straddle a fence where you're trying to be a conservative and you're trying to be a Trump conservative at the same time, and that's very difficult. And so some people like Bill Kristol have just said, hell with it. I'm going to be a conservative again, and I'm enjoying Bill Kristol's tweets.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you.
It's I think apparently one of the things that Trump was concerned about, Reince Priebus, who is from Wisconsin, was where the cheese comes from and where the Paul Ryan comes from, was that he felt that he was a Trump whisperer to Paul Ryan. Now, whether he was or not, I don't know, but that he felt that he was too close to Paul Ryan, and he didn't like it.
Yeah. So, is the new guy going to answer? Is he going to be able to do what previous wasn't?
He's going to be spectacular. That was a quote.
Yeah. Hasn't he said that about just about everything else?
Well, that was what he said this morning in the swearing in. He's going to be spectacular, and he's going to be one of the. He's going to be the great. Hang on, let me get it here. He's going to be the greater. He didn't say he was going to be the greatest. He said he was going to be the great, the greater, the great. Anyway, he didn't say he was going to be the greatest, but he said he was going to be the great. Yeah.
Okay.
He's also having his first cabinet meeting, and Kelly's in it. And he answered questions about North Korea, saying that we will handle it. We will handle North Korea. We're going to handle it. We will handle North Korea. We're going to handle it. We're going to handle North Korea. He also, in the swearing in of John Kelly, referred twice, saying to the reporters, we're going to the boardroom now. We're going to have a cabinet meeting. You'll see us in the boardroom in a minute. We're going to have a cabinet meeting. He was referring to the cabinet room.
Okay.
Which he called the boardroom.
Well, I mean, give him a break. He still hasn't figured out where the bathroom is yet.
But that made me wonder, does he see himself as the chairman of the board?
Well, of course. Of course, that's always been his shtick. He doesn't get his hands dirty with actual policy or actually doing the job.
Chairman of the board is a different function from President of the United States.
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
I just thought it was a very interesting phrase, and he wasn't saying it jokey like it was in The Apprentice or something. It was actually clearly something that he refers to the cabinet room as the boardroom.
Yeah, I got to be honest. As I was looking at the the news over the weekend, the parallels to the Nixon years, I not lost. Because I'm looking at another military guy, being replacing a chief of staff, just kind of reminded me, of the Nixon years.
Do you follow Richard Nixon on Twitter?
I don't. I should though.
Oh, do you? I'll tell you which one it is, because there are a few. There's only one Richard Nixon worth following, though.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to when Haldeman resigned and you had Haig take over. You go kind of right there. And my problem with military people is they take orders. And it seems to me Kelly, for all of the bluster, is going to be a guy who is one of the Trump, the biggest Trumpians, and he's just going to carry the water and take orders.
Well, will he for good? Now, interestingly, I think it's interesting. He apparently has a good relationship. He's friends with Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, and he also has a good relationship with National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, who does not have a good relationship with President Trump. Now, that's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Because
McMaster is said to be on the way out. So if he has a good relationship with these two military men are said to be two of the sort of anchors of the White House, the two guys who, if it looks like the balloon might go up, it's like, get McMaster's and Mattis. But now it'll be, get McMaster's, Mattis, and Kelly. Get the triumvirate.
Yeah, you're not going to make the Sopranos.
I'm joking.
I know. Oh, I love it. It's going to be fun to watch. I mean, that's the whole point. This is all quite entertaining. And the next big political theater moment. We're going to go after tax reform, right?
Did you say tax reform?
Yes, I did. I don't believe in
did
using
say
the
it.
reform word where I know it's bad. Reform to me is generally something you want that is good. What they're doing is in my view, bad.
Well, it's the thing is it one of the things that one of the questions is it going to happen? And I think many in the Senate certainly don't think it is going to happen. Yeah, they don't think it is going to happen.
Of course not, because it's more bad policy. Look, Trump ran on populism, on we're going to make people's lives better. Yet everything that they've attempted to do is in the realm of making people's lives worse, or at least the mass of people. We've created in this country the largest class of billionaires in the history of civilization. In fact, the Forbes 400 now has 153 too many. We've created that through lower wages, through less health care, through less educational opportunity, through less infrastructure. We've done that. We've gone, here, hoard. And the rest of us go, yeah, we'll take less.
What they're planning to do is they want to get the American voter excited about tax reform.
Yeah, again, making rich people richer does not excite me.
Well, I think they're not going to sell it that way. They're going to sell it that it's going to be for the middle class.
Of course. And again, I still remember. Do you remember your Bush Prize? Did you get your Bush Prize? Run into the mailbox to get my $300 check. Woohoo!
I don't remember that.
Big Bush Prize. In fact, I remember the letter a couple of weeks before to tell me that my Bush Prize was coming. While I got $300.
Did it happen?
It actually happened. This was 2001 when they passed that tax reform or deform back then that gave the wealth class just, I think that if you were making over like, what was it, $500,000, you got something like a $50,000 break. I forget what it was, but I got $300. And I remember they spent $18 million to send out a letter telling everybody that their Bush Prize was in the mail. Yeah, see, I don't have total amnesia. I haven't I don't drink enough water maybe, because it must be in the water that makes us not remember what happened just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's all that fluoride or something.
Is that what it is? All right, there you go. It must be the fluoride. Now let's go back to the healthcare thing.
Yes, the healthcare thing. Well, President Trump is about to, at some point in the next couple of weeks, and Kellyanne Conway says he's going to decide this week, cut off the thingies. That didn't sound right, but didn't sound right at all. But cut off the subsidy things that the health insurance companies like that help people.
Yeah, that's going to be fun to watch. And I'm actually hoping he does it.
And if he does it, the health insurance companies will put the rates up because actually, defending the health insurance companies a little bit here, they're going to have to. And it could be by 20%. And they're not going to be, I don't think they're going to be happy about it, but I'll tell you what they probably will do. They're going to go loud and proud and blame President Trump.
Absolutely. And you're going to see that. You're going to see the Republican Party squeal. Because at the end of the day, I've been saying this from the beginning. Unfortunately, the savior of this country is going to have to be the Republican Party, and it's going to come from the insurance associations and the wealthy people, just grabbing them by the you-know-whats and squeezing.
I think, the fact that Democrats are saying, well, we've got changes that we can offer to Obamacare, and Bernie Sanders saying, I've got my single payer, I think all of it's going to be irrelevant right now. Because the single payer is the single player, and that's the Republican Party.
Yeah,
that was quite clever.
That was very clever.
Thank you.
Good on you.
Thank you. Sound of one hand clapping there.
I was trying, All right, let's move on. Lastly, voting machines, real quick. What do we got going on with voting machines?
The DEF CON conference of hackers and various assorted, grisly types in Las Vegas is going on. They put them all in a conference room, locked them up for 3 days, and said, have at it at voting machines that we've bought on eBay, and various things like that. See if you can get in. One intern basically got in with a hat pin, and everybody else got in gleefully, got hold of all kinds of voting returns and ballots and things like that, and said, oh, yeah, we can do it. Well, the Russians can do it in about 2 minutes.
Yeah. Again, if a bunch of people who spend their time in the basement, hacking, this, that, and the other thing, if they can do it, trust me, the Russian government can certainly do it.
And they said, so what they're saying, what the main woman who does this is saying, what you need is paper ballots and audits.
Absolutely. Again, something I said right from the very start, and any thoughtful, rational person would have said right from the very start.
I want a paper ballot. I don't want to vote on a machine.
I'm right there with you.
I don't know where my vote goes.
I'm with you. I agree. We get a receipt when we go to the ATM. Victoria, I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
Always great talking to our good friend Victoria Jones. Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham. Black Women's Equal Pay Day is Monday, July 31st, the day that marks how long into the year black women have to work to be paid the same wages as a white man was paid last year. The Economic Policy Institute says black women workers are paid just 67 cents on the dollar compared to white non-Hispanic men. And that is even after controlling for other factors like education, years of experience, and location. Black women workers in the U.S. are the victims of both gender and race pay gaps. EPI says over the last 37 years, gender wage gaps have narrowed, but racial wage gaps are worse. White women's wages are 76% of white men's, but black women are at 67% of white men's wages. And EPI says myths, like if black women worked harder, they'd get the pay they deserve, are false. Black women work longer hours than white women. Economists at EPI say a second myth is that black women can educate themselves out of the pay gap. EPI says black women are paid less than white men at every level of education. A third myth is that black women choose lower-paying occupations. The reality there is that in all occupations, black women make less than white men. WIN's Joanne Powers has more labor news.
The United Steelworkers reached a tentative agreement with Goodyear Tire and Rubber late Saturday night, averting a possible strike just hours shy of the deadline. If approved, the 5-year master contract would cover 7,000 workers at 5 plants in Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, Alabama, and Kansas. Workers voted in April to authorize a strike if an agreement couldn't be reached before the previous 4-year contract expired at midnight Saturday. Although both sides have been largely silent about negotiations, the Steelworkers Policy Committee indicated in a message to members on Thursday that the company and the union were still far apart on issues including wages, health care, scheduling, and pensions. They also alleged that Goodyear had threatened probationary new hires with firing if they took part in a potential strike. The agreement must now be ratified by USW members at the individual plants. Votes are expected in the next few weeks. The union, representing 16,500 workers at Walmart's main supermarket chain in Chile, announced Friday that workers have voted to go on strike, calling for higher wages. Walmart operates nearly 400 stores in the country. Either party can now request government-mediated talks in an attempt to reach a settlement and avert the strike.
Brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield National Labor Office, empowering working Americans with stable health coverage for over 50 years. The National Labor Office is committed to remaining the top choice for the 17 million union workers, retirees, and families they serve. Online at bcbs.com/NLO.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So Canton, Mississippi, the focus right now of, a major labor battle going on as the UAW, the United Auto Workers, are fighting to organize the workers there. And, we're seeing Nissan putting up what, we expect, another, expensive anti-union campaign maybe not the size that we saw at Boeing, but lots of money being spent. And again, it comes down to workers fighting for better wages, hours, conditions, and, well, employers fighting for absolute dictatorial control. It's going to be interesting to see how this vote turns out. And here to talk about what's going on down there in Canton, we've asked Dave Jamieson, a labor reporter with Huffington Post, to come talk with us. Dave, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be here.
So, I look at this, and again, the center of the world is, in the labor world, seems to be the South.
Yeah, this is a huge deal, especially after Chattanooga a couple of years ago. That's where the UAW lost that big election at Volkswagen. It was kind of a squeaker. It was a really painful one. Now they're giving it another go, and this is long been their goal to unionize an entire large auto factory in the South. And they've poured years into this campaign at Nissan in Canton, and this is the culmination of it. So it's a very, I think, exciting and unnerving time for workers down there who've been involved in the campaign.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Now, I remember that Volkswagen campaign where you had politicians coming out and threatening workers that, well, we won't give state subsidies and you're going to lose your job, coming from not just the Volkswagen folks but also politicians. Are we seeing the same thing in Mississippi?
It's kind of a different dynamic. We are seeing some of that. Phil Bryant, the Republican governor of Mississippi, weighed in the other day saying, workers should vote it down. You've got some local mayors in the town surrounding the facility saying vote it down. But what's a little different here versus VW had a stated position of neutrality. They did not run this anti-union campaign, and at times it even looked like VW basically was pulling for the UAW, which was kind of a unique circumstance. And Nissan's very different in that they are doing what is typical of an employer in the U.S., and they are running an active campaign against the union. So whereas in Chattanooga there certainly was internal pressure within the plant, there is a lot more here in this case. So there's both external and internal pressure going on now. And this is what you have whenever, look, most union votes go down. You don't even see them in the newspaper. Every day the National Labor Relations Board puts out election results, and in a lot of cases people didn't even know these elections were happening. This is a very different case where lots of people are watching this because of what it could mean for Mississippi and what it could mean for the South more generally. And of course, Republicans, the unionization rate in Mississippi, I don't need to tell you, is very, very low. And, the Republican politicians there want to keep it that way. And so everybody's keeping a close eye on this thing.
Yeah, I mean, because this could be, again, we're always looking for that one spark that's going to, ignite a wave of organizing. And look, as someone who studies labor history, it's concerning to me that, I go back and I think of some of the great battles of the past where the communities, I think of the Autolite strike in Toledo, where the community was 100% behind the workers. And yet, you've got these companies now who are using community support to put them down with this fear of, well, you're going to lose this and all your businesses are going to fail. And it just seems to be an interesting dynamic to me.
Yeah, and down there right now you've got both sides kind of fighting, through proxies. The UAW has done what looks to be a pretty smart job of rallying a lot of civil rights groups. The state NAACP has been on board with them. Nissan, on the other hand, is rallied, obviously, as you'd imagine, the business groups against it, but they've also, found some local pastors to speak out against it. And, in talking to workers, it's a really, really interesting calculation that they're making down there. Because, look, the reality is there aren't a lot of good-paying blue-collar jobs in that area. Right. It's Mississippi, wages are really low. The Canton plant has been really good for the area. It's been there 14 years now. And a lot of them will tell you, look, you're lucky to have a job in the Canton facility. There aren't a lot of jobs that pay $25 an hour if you don't have a college degree. And but the rejoinder to that, the pro-union workers will say, look, I was told I'd hit $25, a decade ago, and it took me. It took me 10 years longer than they said it would for me to get there. And, they point to the frozen pension, the rising health care costs, and they say, this may be a good job for the area. That doesn't mean that, we shouldn't have a mechanism to hold the company accountable. And so that, what Nissan is trying to convince people and its allies is that, hey, look, this plan has been a godsend. Do you really want to rock the boat, bring in the UAW here? And that's a pretty compelling argument. Like one worker who's voting for the union told me, he said, look, when you got a guy who was making $8 or $9 an hour before the Canton plant came along, he becomes really scared of jeopardizing his $25 an hour job, even if he feels like Nissan hasn't treated him fairly.
Right. And as I understand, I mean, working conditions are a huge part of this as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's workers will bring up safety issues when you talk to them. There's UAW notes that there's been some OSHA complaints recently, and so that is a big thing. And I was talking with one worker yesterday. She said, "Look, I've been in the plant 14 years, and my managers move me around willy-nilly, and I have no say in it." She's like, "Seniority kind of means nothing around here, and I want it to mean something." And one really interesting element there is the use of temps. There are a lot of temps in that place. And, especially if you're from Michigan, you don't think of an auto plant as having, lower wage, unstable work like temp jobs are. But there are a lot of temps in that factory. And even those who are not temps, who have been in the factory a long time, are good standing Nissan employees, they say, hey, look, we want to lift up those temps too. We don't want Nissan to be able to rely on temp workers. They have all these years because they pit us against each other. One worker was telling me over the weekend, he's like, when you get your year-end bonus from Nissan as a Nissan employee, it may not be as high as you'd hoped, and what they'll tell you is, well, hey, sorry, but we got to pay these temp workers some bonuses too. And so the two groups, I think, feel like they get bounced off of one another, which is really common when you've got kind of a two-tier system going on inside any workplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's like they've created a two-tier wage system to pit people against each other because, you're saying that they make like $25 an hour, the full-time people, but, I just read an article that said, the Kelly Services people, because I guess that's the temp agency they use, they pay between $13 and $17 an hour.
That's right. And even if you are a Nissan employee, it's going to take you years to get up to that 25 an hour. And there's just no guarantees with a contract temp job, and it's interesting because they work right alongside one another. A woman was telling me this weekend. She said, "Look, I work directly across from a temp on the line. That guy works just as hard as I do. Why shouldn't he be making more money and enjoy job stability the way I do?"
Yeah, and the other part of this is, especially from the temp perspective, because as you know, if your career is doing this job, you kind of have an idea of how it's supposed to be done and how you do it safely. You bring a stream of temps through that maybe they've done this, maybe they haven't. Who knows what happens to the working conditions?
Yeah, I think there's could be obvious safety implications to that too. That's the whole idea of having kind of a stable union job is to have a high level of experience in the work and to not have much turnover. And I think having a large reliance on a temp workforce can obviously diminish that.
So when is this vote going down?
It's going down Thursday and Friday, and don't ask me how it's going to go because who knows? I mean, obviously unions, they don't file for an election unless they think they're going to win. But I think obviously the way things go down there, I'd expect it to be a tight one, and who knows what happens between now and then. The truth is it's a very it's a pretty intense atmosphere. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some more allegations flying one way or another about what's going on down there, and there's always the possibility for more unfair labor practice charges. And the union is claims that Nissan is playing dirty. The general counsel for the labor board did file charges against Nissan earlier this year, saying that the company basically threatened layoffs. The managers threatened layoffs if workers voted in the union. And obviously, that's illegal. You can't do that. That hasn't been settled yet. Nothing's been proven at the board. But that was the general counsel agreed with the union that enough to bring charges against the company. So it's it's pretty heated down there.
Yeah, and you add into that those kind of threats, the captive audience meetings, the constant barrage of anti-union literature on the job, and it's just it's a hostile work environment. And look, I've talked to people who have been through this. It's generally the company who's got their thumb on people, and it's always curious to me when you get that kind of treatment. Why it is you wouldn't immediately repel from it.
Yeah, I think it can go both ways. Obviously, companies wouldn't do these run these campaigns, and in a lot of cases they bring in outside consultants and law firms at great expense to run this. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't typically effective. I mean, there have been studies showing that when companies do avail themselves of that stuff, that it weakens the union's hand in the election. But in a lot of cases, people they recoil from that, and people are smart, and I think in a lot of cases they may feel they're getting spin from management, and it can backfire against the company. But I don't know that's normally the case, or companies probably wouldn't do it. But what's going on inside the plant now is workers are seeing a lot of their managers wearing vote no shirts. They're having these big group meetings. They call them roundtables, where everybody sits down and a manager goes through some slides and tells you. They say they're giving you facts, but obviously the facts come with a distinctly kind of negative connotation when it comes to unions. So this is what often goes on, not just in a big deal factory election like this one is, but in any workplace where there's going to be a union vote. Management often tries to push back. They say they're just giving you facts. They're going to give you information, but it's always reflects negatively on the union, and that's what the UAW is fighting right now. They're trying to rally troops from the outside, but it's inside the factory. That's Nissan's territory, and the company is trying to persuade workers right now, and they've got 3 more days to do it.
Yeah, I go back to something my grandfather always said: if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend 2 to get it. And you look at all the money Nissan's spending on telling these workers why they don't need it. Again, I go back to you better figure out you need it, because and thanks to the Trump administration, and maybe you can give me a little thought on this, the last line of questioning, because you look at all of this money Nissan's spending. There was a persuader rule that the Obama administration had put in to let people know, shareholders know how much companies are spending on union busting. That's going by the wayside, I guess, though, right?
Yeah, it has. The whole idea there was to shed a little more light on this world of consultants who offer what they call indirect advice, right? So if a company is gets some union buster on retainer or whatever, they'll have to disclose that to the government if that guy comes into the factory and starts giving speeches and such. But if he's just telling managers, kind of just running them as puppets, telling them what to say, then the company doesn't have to disclose that to the feds. And the Obama administration wanted to change that, but that's going to die now with the new administration.
And here's a place where it would be nice to know how much they're actually spending on this union busting campaign.
Yeah, and I don't know whether they have any outside firms involved. I can't speak to that. But what's really telling in this election is Nissan is running television ads in the local market, and what they're doing there. Obviously, they're trying to reach the families of workers, and so that gives you an idea of how big a deal this is when a company is gonna pony up to run ads to try to persuade people kind of on the fringes of this to get and to really try to reach the community and turn the community against the union. It tells you that this is probably a little bigger than the factory itself.
No, I mean it's a whole ideology. Dave, I appreciate the thoughts. I'd love to have you come back as this finishes up and as it moves forward to keep us informed on what's going on.
Yeah, we'll keep a close eye on it. Thanks for having me, Rick.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Dave Jamieson. He's the labor reporter there at Huffington Post. You want to check out his work, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show for working people.
We gotta get organized. We gotta do it today. No more mindless confusion. No more disarray.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. This day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that the NFL Players Association went out on strike. The American Football League and the National Football League officially merged that year. Each league had their own Players Association. With the league merger, they joined forces into one union. The players elected John Mackey, a tight end with the Baltimore Colts, their first president. Frustrated by pay and lack of control over their careers, the players voted to strike. The strike lasted for 2 days. The owners threatened to cancel the season. The NFL used its powerful PR machine to vilify the players in the press. They characterized the players as greedy and stoked fan anger over the walkout. The two sides met again at the bargaining table and reached a collective bargaining agreement. The agreement covered 4 years. The players won improvements to their pensions and dental care. They also secured the right to have agent representation for the first time. But many of the disagreements over pay and control remained unsettled. In 1974, the players were back out on the picket line for 5 weeks during the summer. 8 years later, a 57-day strike disrupted the season. 7 weeks of games were canceled. Then again, 5 years later, the union went on strike during the season. This time, some of the players crossed the picket lines, including stars like Joe Montana and Lawrence Taylor. This broke the strike without settling on a contract. Today, the NFL Players Association continues to push for improved player safety and revenue sharing. The impact of concussions on players' long-term health remains an important issue for the union.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
What the hell we fighting for? Just surrender and it won't hurt at all. Just got time to say your prayer while you're waiting for the hammer to hammer.
Back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting piece by David Dayen. One of the reasons that I was completely against the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement was the investor-state dispute settlement system, which, is in a vast majority of the trade agreements. And what that is if, we as a country decide we're going to change our law. We want to, move forward. We want to have, safer water, clean air, all that stuff, a decent environment, or, we don't want kids smoking or whatever. We don't want, dolphins being swept up with tuna and, whatever rules you come up with. What this investor state dispute settlement does is said, okay, well, if you change your rules, corporations from around the world can sue you. And basically you end your ability to be a sovereign nation and you're at the point of a gun of corporations. And David points out in this recent piece that just came out over the weekend that Argentina had nationalized its airline industry, or this airline company. And I wish I could say it, but I can't. They nationalized it because it was failing. It was horribly mismanaged, and they claimed it was basically bankrupt. It's the nation's flagship airline. So they basically saved it from just being completely gone. All the workers losing their job, the infrastructure going away, all of that stuff. Well, what then happens is, the investors from Spain, because I believe Spain is where the people who had invested in this, and this is where this Burford Capital, who bills themselves as a litigation finance group, they are the largest firm to do this. They invested $13 million to bring the case against the nation of Argentina. And in the settlement, and this is one of those things where you go, we've really just turned what may have been not a bad idea, honestly, because you want to make sure that investors have a bit of security so they can invest, has really just turned into a scheme to, one, usurp laws and sovereignty, and two, make, groups like Burford Capital huge money. The tribunal, in their 400-page ruling, ruled that Argentina owed the investors $324 million. Now, they had been asking for $1.6 billion. They got $324 billion from Argentina, of which Burford Capital pocketed $140 million of it. So you go, wait a second, I thought we were about making sure that we insulate the investors. I didn't realize we'd be making speculators on Wall Street and these lawyer firms a boatload of cash. And it is what it is. They got about right around 40% of the judgment into their pockets. Now, look, I go back to, I'm not in favor of these clauses, because what it does is, as I said, it usurps our ability to, change our laws. And I can give you a bunch of cases. I mean, the dolphin safe tuna one being the most glaring, where we as a country said, you know what? We want fishermen to use nets that don't catch the dolphins when they're catching the tuna. Mexico said, no, we like dolphins in our tuna. We're suing you. And we had to pay them a boatload of money because having that rule was it was a trade barrier. Because the concept of most of our trade agreements are the least restrictive trade barriers. Remember that, because that's important. Least restrictive trade barriers means race to the bottom and stay there. It doesn't mean that you can make laws that make things any better. You have to keep going down, down, down. So if you want to have an environmental rule per se, can't do it. For instance, Mexico sued us because we didn't allow them to dump hazardous waste into the ground. They can do it in Mexico. We can't do it here because we have rules. They sued. India allows 13-year-olds to smoke cigarettes. They actually brought a case against the U.S. for having the 18-year-old limit on those who can smoke. I mean, how bad does it get? And again, I keep coming back to, this is something that the Trump people have not said they're going to take out of any renegotiations of NAFTA and in any trade agreement going forward. You gotta kind of ask that question. Where is it going to take us? Are these people really, honestly and truthfully, do they have the populist rhetoric in mind? Because understand, poor working class people voted for this guy because he was going to make their lives better. He's going to make America great again. He's going to bring back those coal jobs, even though it ain't happening. Not happening. And the thing that bothers me, honestly, is people are going to be harmed over this. You look at the insurance thing. You look at the ACA repeal. You look at what they had put forth. It was about making people's lives worse. Understand what's going to happen with the tax reform that's coming. We've seen this movie over and over and over, and the sequels just keep getting worse. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like most sequels. They keep getting worse. I remember the tax plan under the Bush administration. Come back with me. Come on back. Move it back. 2000, we were actually talking about having a surplus. The country was going to be debt-free. Now, come back. I know it's hard, but come back with me. We were going to be debt-free as a country. You had people opining that we don't know what the new world looks like being debt-free. Could this be devastating to our economy that we didn't owe anything? How would they react? Because we weren't in debt. That was 2000. George W. Bush comes to the White House, has a great tax plan. Hey, screw that. Let's stay in debt. We'll give a whole bunch of money to rich people, and we'll create a ballooning deficit. And with those ballooning deficits comes debt. So remember, we had a moment in 2000 where we were going to be debt-free over the next decade. It's going to happen. Instead of being debt-free, however, we're now, $20 trillion in debt? So again, you go, we were going to be debt-free. We were going to be debt-free. Now we're $20 trillion in debt, and you've got the conservatives going, it's Obama's fault. You go, really? How dumb can you be? Don't forget the wars that we put on the credit card that ran up our debt. Don't forget the giant collapse in 2008 that made us say, "Oh, well, we've got to bail out banks and we need we got a modest stimulus." I wanted something much chunkier, much bigger, much bigger shock to the system to get things going, but we got something. And what did half of that? What was half of the stimulus? Tax cuts. Sorry, tax cuts aren't the answer. I know we've been talking about the tax cuts fairy for a very long time. Sorry, she doesn't work here anymore. And until we wake up and realize that the poison that they're pushing is eventually going to kill us, well, we're going to keep doing the same dumb things and running to the mailbox and hoping for our $300 Bush prize. I really wish I would have just framed the check, because I think people have completely forgotten. And while I got $300, at the very top of the spectrum, they ended up with $100,000, $150,000. Didn't really make a difference in my life, but it did make a difference in the future of this country. Sad, sad stuff. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Frank Emspecht, Workers Independent News, is going to be here to talk about some of the labor stories of the day. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Come to talk.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1981. That was the day the long Major League Baseball strike finally came to an end. The issue that motivated the strike was a dispute between players and management over free agency. Day after summer days slipped by on the calendar with no end in sight. As a result of the strike, a total of 713 games were canceled in the middle of the regular season. And on this day, players and owners reached a compromise, which ended the lengthy strike. In the settlement, a team that lost a free agent could be compensated by drawing from a pool of players. Players agreed to restrict free agency to those who had 6 or more years in the major leagues. Because of the long strike, the All-Star game was pushed all the way back until August 9th. When you go to the ballpark, you're likely not thinking about labor issues. Nonetheless, the players are unionized and had to fight hard to win free agency and other protections. There have been 8 work stoppages in Major League Baseball. 1981 held the record as the longest, until 1994, that is. The strike started in August and resulted in the cancellation of the whole postseason. It was the first time a major sport had its postseason wiped out by a work stoppage. The strike was not settled until the following April. But the good news today is there are only balls and strikes on the field. So, play ball.
Brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands in trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on, the union forever defending our rights. Let's fight the right wing, our workers unite.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So I'm still looking at this Foxconn deal. And, Wisconsin's going to get fleeced over this. And, it's one of those things where you got to even question, is it going to get done? Because you may remember where I'm at in Pennsylvania, there was talk a couple of years ago. In fact, there was a plan put forth, and, former Governor Corbett, was touting the fact that they were going to give, huge amounts of money away that they were going to obviously take from education and social services to hand off to this company to bring a factory to Pennsylvania. And we were going to begin to be the Silicon Valley of the Northeast and blah, 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 blah. Well, it didn't happen. But hey, nice press conference. Lots of yay talk. Not much action. So I'm looking at what's going on in Wisconsin, asking if, is that going to be the same thing? Here to talk a little bit about it, we've asked Frank Emspecht. He is the executive producer over at Workers Independent News, also a managing editor. Frank, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you. If you have a minute, maybe we can get a little better reception if you call me on my landline. But otherwise, we can do this, whatever's best here.
Are you kidding?
Huh? Am I kidding? Well, anyway, the thing in Wisconsin is very interesting because it's $3 billion, right? It's about $20,000 a job. And this is from a Republican administration for years, which has said we can't subsidize anything. We want to cut money in the schools. We want to take $1 billion out of the university budgets over the years. And so they're doing the exact opposite here without a binding agreement, you should understand.
Right.
In other words, what they have is a letter of intent that they signed the other day in Washington. The number of jobs is not clear. They talk about average wages, not median, so we really don't know what kind of work it's going to be. And it's at a level of subsidy, which is about 10 times what anybody else has ever done. Even the craziness in Alabama was about $2,500 a job. Here, it's $20,000, $18,000, this kind of thing. And really, it's a political deal. Where is it going to be? It's going to be in Paul Ryan's district. It isn't going to be 10 miles north, let's say in Milwaukee, where it might actually do some good, but it's going to be in Paul Ryan's district. And it also happens to be helpful because it's right near the Illinois border, so people will be commuting from Illinois probably as well. And so they're going to get a double political hit here. That's what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, and again, the first report I saw, said there would be like 3,000 jobs or $3 billion, and I'm going, isn't that like $1 million a job? Wouldn't it be, just better to invest that into the local community and maybe stuff that we need?
Well, there's all kinds of issues. I mean, let's talk about $3 billion, okay? Let's take $1 billion of that. If you put that into the public schools here, as opposed to taking it away, you would then refund because the Republicans have done such a good job reducing funds for public schools. You'd bring back the level of funding that you need in the state, particularly for the rural areas here, which have just been devastated by the governments, by the Republicans' cuts in education. That's the first billion. The second one, you go back to the university. When you think of job creation, one of the biggest successes here in this state has been the spin-offs from some of the campuses of the University of Wisconsin. Just like you have Silicon Valley in California, which was in part a spin-off from Stanford University, but also the universities in San Francisco. What you have here is a research park in Madison, Wisconsin, among other places. This is not the only one. There are 1,000, probably 5,000 or 6,000 biotech and high-tech jobs now in that research park, mostly spin-offs from the University of Wisconsin. Never mind Epic out here, which is a medical systems system, which has 8,000 people. And again, those are spin-offs from stuff done at the university. So on a per-job basis, anything is better than this. But $1 billion would mean to the university that we could redeem the present, the arrangement here in the state from many years ago, which is if your kid did well in high school, they could get into the university and it would be practically free. That's what $1 billion would do to the university, transform the economic and educational basis of the state. So that's the second billion. You still have a third left over, and there you could fund the kind of rail and transit network that you need to make Wisconsin competitive. And I say that in the most serious way. You have the University of Illinois down there in Champaign-Urbana, which is another Big Ten school. It's competitive to UW in many ways. They're going to have a direct rail line from O'Hare Airport to Champaign-Urbana. Well, if you land at O'Hare Airport and you want to get to Madison, two things happen. 50% of your planes are late or canceled, or you can take the Van Gelder bus and you get off on a sidewalk in a rainstorm with no bus shelter on the street here. Well, that's not going to work if you have anybody who's really competitive. And so that second or third billion could go for the rail system between Chicago and Milwaukee and Minnesota, all through the state, so you would bring Wisconsin back to the 21st century. That is an economic development program when you take $3 billion.
Yeah, but that's kind of hard to have big signing
nonsense.
ceremonies with.
Huh? Look, the construction industry people, I talked to the building trades Friday at some length about this because, Walker and Trump have been talking about them for months, right? Well, this is going to be a non-prevailing wage project because the governor is pushing to make sure all prevailing wage legislation is out of the state budget by the time they get around to signing it. So, bingo, right? You're going to have non-union, out-of-state contractors coming in here to that project that will result in bidding down the construction wages in the entire state of Wisconsin. So what's going to happen here is that this project will be used to further attack the building trades unions. And I think almost everybody in the trades sees this that way.
Yeah. What do you say to the person, though, Frank, who says,
this is just the first part of the rant, but I'll calm down. It's just bankrupting the state and destroying this. But okay, all right, I'm calm.
Okay. Well, what do you say to the person who said this is going to reignite the manufacturing base?
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. We're talking about what amounts to printed circuit board assembly work here, okay, which is increasingly robotized. You go to Foxconn in China, assuming people aren't jumping off the roof because they're so upset, you've got an increasing automated, robotized operation. And they're putting this plant here not to manufacture, not to help the Wisconsin people out, because it's too complicated to ship these big flat-screen devices from China to the United States. It adds too much of a cost. Better to produce it here. They're not coming in with high-skilled machinist jobs. It's just not going to happen, and that's not the way this stuff is produced. It's just not there. So,
right.
Yes, there'll be some engineering jobs for sure. Yes, there'll be some design jobs. But the majority of it is going to be low-paid, unskilled, relatively unskilled assembly work. That's what it is. That's what they're doing.
But according to reports, they're talking $53,000 a year.
Average, not median. And the difference is this. If you have 5,000 or 3,000 workers there, and 800 of them are high-paid engineers, and 2,200 of them are getting $18 an hour, you can come out to $53,000. You don't come out to that for most people in this industry. Unless Foxconn is coming in here to almost double the average wage for unskilled workers in the state, which is absolutely incomprehensible, you're not going to see that. You're going to see people earning $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year without benefits, okay, and some engineers earning well, which is the entire way worldwide that this industry is structured.
Yeah, but here's the other question that I have for this, because, this is part of a much larger problem in my view. We've got this beggar thy neighbor economic development that has grabbed this country by the throat to where we're sacrificing education spending, infrastructure spending, so that we can give massive handouts to these corporations. In fact, a 2016 study by Ernst & Young found that, right now, these companies and capital investment, the first thing that they're looking for is not a tax structure, is not location, is not a union-friendly environment, but how much money they can fleece from the local and state governments.
Exactly. Bearing in mind, I think we need to understand this. These are not gifts here. These factories are profit-making institutions. A company doesn't build a factory based on a tax subsidy. They build it because they're going to make money on it. If they did it because of a tax subsidy, as soon as that subsidy is gone, the plant's gone. So if you're talking about serious economic development, you have to recognize that these firms and these companies, these factories that are built, are there to make money as standalone operations. Now, the icing on the cake is if they can convince somebody to put in another $500 million or pay for something else. But these companies and the factories are designed to be profitable. If they are designed to be unprofitable and only dependent on the subsidy, you have no economic development. You have a parasite. And when the parasite is finished or the state runs out of money, place is gone. And so you have to understand that in terms of these things that are being built. Because if Foxconn is saying, unless we get the subsidy, we're not going to do this, that means the place is automatically non-profitable and will be a complete dependent on the state of Wisconsin forever. The wrong thing to do.
I'm with you. Let's move on. Before I let you go, I got one more thought. Going back to last week's health care vote, I'm curious your thoughts of John McCain.
Well, I'm glad he did it. I think he did a good thing by doing that. I think it could be that he might have really been aggravated when he was insulted by Trump. But I think fundamentally, we as progressives should fight for what we want, and what we want is a single-payer operation. We don't want the insurance companies to be the gatekeepers. And this is the time to push it, particularly if Trump is going to go now and destroy Obamacare administratively if he can do it.
Yeah, I mean,
time to go on the offensive. Time to really grab this and say, we believe, we don't, if we're pro-life, how can we possibly support an extra 30 or 40,000 people in this country dying because they don't have insurance? This is a moral, fundamental issue, and we should grab it and run with it.
I'm right there with you. I mean, to me, and again, I had a long conversation with my kids about the idea of single payer, and even my 9-year-olds are saying, yeah, it makes sense to have one big giant insurance pool that everybody pays into, cradle to grave. Makes perfect sense to a 9-year-old.
Well, it makes sense to Social Security. It makes sense to veterans. It makes sense to the hotel workers in New York City, all of whom are covered under one basis or another on what amounts to a single payer system, and so we can do it, and we can save billions of dollars. The only impediment, as far as I can see, is Big Pharma and the insurance companies.
Yeah.
Most people don't want this craziness that we've got. Yeah, supporters of Trump, too, when they have a chance to think about it. But if we don't do it, we're lost. And this is the moment, I think, to go on the offensive and stop screwing around here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Frank, I appreciate the time. Thanks for the information.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Great talking with you. Frank M. Speck, managing editor there and producer at Workers Independent News. The great clips you hear at the beginning of the program. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show. For working people.
A union man, brother firefighters, my friend. And the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1939. That was the day striking auto workers in Cleveland, Ohio, defended their picket lines in what is known as the Battle of East 140th Street. Members of UAW Local 45 at GM's Fisher Body Plant had been on strike for 3 weeks. They had joined striking GM workers at 12 plants throughout Michigan. They demanded a supplemental agreement granting skilled workers wage increases, overtime adjustments and seniority, and apprentice provisions. In Cleveland, strikers vowed to stop the scabbing and were mostly successful. Now, at the start of the morning shift, a scab attempted to plow through the picket lines at a high rate of speed. Strikers flooded the gates and brought the scab car to a virtual stop. As they attempted to convince him not to cross through, mounted police viciously charged and attacked the strikers. Police continued to shoot tear gas guns from behind plant gates. Soon, there were more than 5,000 picketers fighting with police as workers poured out from half a dozen nearby plants to support the strikers. For over 2 hours, workers showered strike-breaking forces with bricks, rocks, and paving blocks. They overturned scab cars and drove the police off the street and into the plant. Fighting broke out again in the afternoon when police tried to bring in more tear gas supplies. Strike leaders directed activities from an amplifier on the roof of a nearby restaurant. The next day, famed Prohibition crusader Elliot Ness, now Cleveland's director of public safety, enforced a 500-yard riot zone, banning all gatherings near the gates and limited picketers to 7 at each gate. Strikers began picketing the homes of known scabs and would ratify a new contract
just days later. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif, stepped down on Friday, hours after the country's Supreme Court said he was unfit to lead. Sharif's woes date back to the leak of the so-called Panama Papers last year. Those papers helped investigators realize that Sharif and his family were hiding large amounts of undisclosed wealth in offshore bank accounts. Sharif's resignation marks the biggest political downfall stemming from the Panama Papers since the Prime Minister of Iceland resigned last year. Prime Minister Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson had made his name campaigning against corruption in Iceland, but was revealed to have withheld his family's stake in a foreign company. And there was concern all week about whether Friday prayers at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque would end in violence. After all, there have been recurring and sometimes violent protests around the Muslim holy site in recent weeks after gunmen killed 2 Israeli policemen at the site and Israel subsequently installed metal detectors there. But Friday prayers have come and gone without any major incident. Earlier this week, Israel uninstalled the metal detectors, announcing that high-tech cameras and sensors would suffice. The Jewish holy site, the Dome of the Rock, as well as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam, are located on the same Jerusalem compound. And stay tuned for major news from Venezuela this weekend, where President Nicolas Maduro is pushing ahead with plans for a Sunday election to pick the members of a new constituent assembly tasked with rewriting the country's constitution. Maduro is deeply unpopular, but the composition of the assembly is designed to maximize his influence. The assembly has seats set aside for pro-Maduro groups and unduly represents smaller towns in rural parts of the country where he's more popular. The United States has said it will levy sanctions against anyone elected to the assembly. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
People all over this world are getting organized to fight to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Got an email from Alice. She asked, Newt Gingrich is such a hypocrite. I love when emails start off like that. She said, any main reason our nation is in the mess we currently find ourselves. She says, I was not surprised to learn that while he is working publicly to destroy Obamacare, he and his wife are secretly funded by the healthcare industry. What I don't understand is why the healthcare industry, who is against repealing Obamacare, would hire such a horrible person who is working against their interests. Any thoughts? Well, Alice, my first thought is he really working against their interests? Understand, he had done an op-ed in The Hill not too long ago that had pushed the idea of higher rates for people with pre-existing conditions and older people. He had pushed to stabilize the markets. He was one of the calming voices in the Republican Party to say, no, you can repeal it, but keep those subsidies at least through 2018. You know, because we've got to, anything we do, you've got to kind of soften the edges while simultaneously allowing the rates to skyrocket for older people and people with pre-existing conditions. And understand, that's what the Republicans that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to do away with any of the protections for people while allowing, the Wild West of the health industry. Now, again, you come back to this. Why would he want that extension through 2018? Because the shock to the system of people whose rates are going to go through the roof would be a great opportunity to raid the coffers. I look at me, I'm 50 years old, and I'm sure I've got some pre-existing conditions that you'd go, well, hey, we're going to have to double your insurance rates. So instead of, $1,000 or $1,100 a month, you're going to pay $2,000 a month. And, oh, by the way, if you take subsidies, well, the subsidies are going to pick that up. So it's a great raid on the tax coffers. And look, what corporations understand well, and the thing we should have learned from Donald Trump during the election,
And he was very honest about this, and to his credit, he said, look, I bought both of you. I gave money to both parties, and lots of it, because I know I was going to need something. This is the health insurance industry playing both sides against the middle, saying, look, if you do this, we want to have our say in it. We don't want you to do it yet because we're happy with this. It was playing both sides. It's, what we would call smart business. You want to make sure that you've got your hand in both pies. Which is why, again, Alice, not surprised that you've got Gingrich running around outwardly saying repeal, 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 while working through kind of a softer tone to make sure that the people who are feeding him, making sure that they're covered. So not surprising in my view. None at all. In fact, I guess how we found out about this, and Lee Fang over at the Intercept, he was the guy who broke the story about Gingrich's production company. When you get out of Congress, you got this swinging door. So the first thing you do is you set up a consulting business to where you can then advocate for, whatever. You use all of your connections to, twist arms and stuff. And we found out of this because Trump had nominated his wife, Callista, the third wife, to be the ambassador to the Vatican. And again, the message that sends, third wife, adultery, all of that, sending her to the Vatican, very tone deaf. But we've learned about it through the ethics forms. Again, something the administration wants to do away with, because we found out that they've got a lot of these clients. They also have clients who work in the for-profit education sector. Again, pushing the for-profit college. And you go, at some point, do we not have to push back against even that? So there's my answer, Alice. If you want to email me, got any questions, comments, rick@thericksmithshow.com. And finally, you remember the congressman or the candidate for Congress from Montana who got upset because a reporter asked him a question, then decided to throw him to the ground, choke him and start punching him? Remember that? Greg Gianforte. He was sworn into Congress in June, also pled guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge. The sentencing was just rolled out. And for the plea agreement, he agreed to donate $50,000 to the Committee to Protect Journalists. Come on, that's funny. Also was fined $385. He has to complete 20 hours of anger management and ordered to perform 40 hours of community service, of which that 40 hours of community service will be done with this ROC Wheels program there in Bozeman, Montana. They are a nonprofit group that builds wheelchairs for kids who need them. And look, a good charity. I just don't know that I want somebody with those kind of anger problems around a bunch of kids. Just a thought. But, I'm going, he literally attacked our Fourth Estate, literally, during a congressional campaign. And the punishment that comes of this, think what the message here is. The punishment was $385. That was his fine. Going to have to spend 20 hours of talking to a friend in Montana about anger management and a little community service that's going to look good for him, because there'll be a lot of PR around it. That's the negative. The positive, and this is just kind of mind-blowing, and I think speaks volumes about who we are. After he assaulted this journalist, after he threw Ben Jacobs to the ground, broke his glasses, punched him, choked him, his campaign got $116,000 in campaign donations after attacking a journalist. What does that say about us? How screwed up is that? And this guy, he's sitting in Congress. This is who I'm supposed to tell my children to look up to aspire to be. When I was a kid, the governor, the president, people, senators, people in Congress, those were people that we looked to, and I dare say as role models, people to aspire to, statesmen. I think this story, like many other coming out of Congress, speaks volumes of who we've become and who the moneyed interests have pushed us towards. Not a good day. Just saying. If you've got any questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com is where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And like I said, as always, email me. Tell me your thoughts, something I got under your skin with, something you agree with, disagree. Love to hear it. rick@thericksmithshow.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming.